Hello, and welcome to this episode of Skift Meetings podcast, the podcast for curious event professionals. My name is Andrea Doyle, and I am the senior editor of Skift Meetings. In this episode, titled Going to Bat for Louisville, I chat with Cleo Battle, President and CEO of Louisville Tourism. We talk about how his Olympic hopes were dashed, but as a result, he found the hotel restaurant management industry, and the rest is history. We talk about how destination management companies fought for years to have a seat at the table, and now that they're successful, what that means. We talked about how tourism could help improve neighborhoods, and how in Louisville in particular, wayfinding and storytelling are helping. We talk about the importance of meetings and conventions, leaving a legacy in the community they're meeting in, how diversity matters, and how he's managing political decisions in Louisville, which is located in the state of Kentucky. And finally, we chatted about the importance of telling an authentic story. I hope you enjoy listening to this conversation, and I invite you to check out other episodes of our podcast with tips and insights from today's most influential event professionals. You can find all the episodes on our website or by subscribing through your favorite podcast service.
And now for a word from our sponsors, PHL Life Sciences, a division of the Philadelphia Convention and Visitors Bureau. Host your convention or trade show in Philadelphia, one of America's leading life sciences hubs. PHL Life Sciences, the first and only CVB division of its kind, will connect you to the professionals at the forefront of your industry and to a culture you can only find in Philadelphia. A city known for its rich history that's forging a bright future, Philadelphia challenges the expected and defies convention. A world of discovery is waiting. Visit phllife.com to learn more.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Cleo. And I was hoping you could start by sharing your journey that brought you to the top spot at Louisville Tourism.
Well, that's a long journey, Andrea. And some folks, when I'm speaking to folks, I tell the story. I was a track and field athlete in college, and this is my second or third year. I got hurt, and those thoughts of going to the Olympics were all dashed by the time I got hurt, and I had to begin focusing in on school because I think for a couple of years there I was just my major declared was undecided, and I went to speak to a counselor, and counselor talked about hotel restaurant management. And I thought to myself, the only thing I'd ever done in a hotel is trash them. But, I said, what the heck? And, I was just cruising along in school and taking the classes. And then they came back around and said, well, you need 1,300 hours in a hotel to graduate. I was like, oh my goodness. And of course, they're like, did you really think you were just going to get a hotel degree and never step foot in a hotel? So that's how I got started. And I went into management training. And then I was an assistant GM of a hotel in Los Angeles. I've been in Orange County. I eventually moved to upstate New York, where I was then in sales for quite some time. And then I moved to Richmond, Virginia, where I was the GM of a hotel. And it was not too long after, I guess I was in that job for a couple of years. And I made the transition from the hotel to the Convention and Visitors Bureau. And I have worked my way up through sales on the Convention and Visitors Bureau side ever since. 17 years in sales in Richmond. And then I've been here in Louisville for a little over 10 years as chief operating officer, then eventually the president.
Okay. Where'd you go to college?
I started at University of Colorado, but I finished at Metropolitan State University in Denver. They
Okay.
have a hospitality program there, pretty good hospitality program at Metropolitan State.
Okay.
But I'm from Denver originally.
And when you started working in hotels, did you feel this is the career for me?
It's funny. I did not, but everyone said, wow, you're really good at this.
Okay.
You're just a natural. Honestly, and I think, when you're 21, 22 years old, whatever I was, I've got to have 1,300 hours to graduate. And that was what was on my mind. Okay. I just need to be at the hotel. I've got to get these hours in, but eventually you find a pathway, you learn, you understand. And I did get into working at a hotel and really enjoyed it.
How do you describe to your friends and family what you do now?
I market the city.
Okay.
My job is to market the city, to bring visitors to our community. And I mean, so when I'm talking to family or neighbors, I leave it at that. I think that's simple enough for people to understand. If I'm talking if I'm talking to a group of individuals or speaking at an event, I'll probably go more into defining visitors as leisure visitor, corporate visitors, meeting, convention, and event visitors. But ultimately, at a CVB, DMO, whatever we're calling ourselves these days, your job are to bring visitors to town. I say this internally. I mean, there's a lot of other BS we do at CVB. There's just a lot of other things, but our jobs are to bring visitors to the community.
Right. And it seems like the role of a CVB or DMO has gotten even more all-encompassing in recent years, to be marketing organizations, to deal with political issues and boycotts.
Yeah, no, I certainly would agree with that. I think it just feels like it was about 10 years ago. All we talked about when we got together as an industry was relevance. We want a seat at the table. We want a seat at the table. We want our voice to be heard in the community. Well, I think they heard us, and now we're absolutely at the table, and they want to know what you're going to do while you're at the table. And yes, so you're right. I think it's political things, whether it's legislative issues. I've been the president now for almost 2 years, and I've been through 2 legislative assemblies here in the state and needing to lobby and do a lot of work. Some on behalf of the industry and some, against harmful legislation. So that's a busy part of this job. But I think the other thing you sort of taught, and I saw it in your questions, the other thing that's absolutely happening in a lot of our communities, 10 years ago, economic impact was, and you've probably seen this power of travel slide where, the visitors come in, they come by airplane, they stay in a hotel, they eat at the restaurants, and then those dollars cycle throughout the community. And so that's what you talked about as the measurement for economic impact of tourism. Now, we still do that, but today, communities want to know, you've got an economic impact, but what's the social impact of tourism to a community? And we spent a lot of time in that space, trying to fill that space and sort of feel where we want to have an impact. One of my favorite sayings, Andrea, is a good place to live is a good place to visit. Mm-hmm. How can tourism contribute to making the destination a better place to live while staying in our lane? Mm-hmm. The last part of that, staying in our lane, is probably the most important part. When you think about our lane and community, you think about transportation. That helps to make a community better. That helps the life of a visitor to be better. You think about workforce. That both it helps the community be better. It helps our industry to be better. So, working in our neighborhoods. How do we drive more visitors into our neighborhoods? And so we've tried to say we want to help make the community better, but we need to make sure it touches our lane. I don't want to be involved in affordable housing or affordable health care or dealing with drug issues of a community. That's not in the lane of tourism. And so, yeah, we're doing more and more. We talk about wayfinding. We talk about improved transportation. We talk about neighborhood preservation and development. How do we make our neighborhoods better, whether it's through wayfinding, whether it's improving how we tell the story of neighborhoods? How do we draw visitors into those communities? We're working a lot with our airport. How can we partner with the airport? So one of the things we do when the airport lands a new direct flight, we go into wherever that market is. So, for example, Austin, Texas. So we will do some advertising and marketing in Austin, Texas to try to get more visitors on those planes to support our flights. That's something that is good for visitors. It's also good for residents. So I think you sort of see where I'm going is we try to do things where we stay in our lane. It's good for visitors and it's good for residents. And so that's sort of the social impact so we've got economic impact, but now there's social impact. What's your social impact? I know this is Skift Meetings. So for meetings and conventions, we've got a program that we call Leave a Legacy. And what do we try to do with Leave a Legacy? So prior to the pandemic, convention come to town, they say, hey, we want to go to Dare to Care, which is our local food bank. We want to go to Dare to Care and we want to pack food for folks who need food. And so these clients, these attendees and the meeting planner, this is how they want it. Tell us where to line up at the convention center to get on the bus, to get to Dare to Care. When we get to Dare to Care, those folks hand us everything we need. They take us where we need to pack up the food. We pack up the food. We give them back all of their stuff. We get back on the bus. You drop us off at the convention center. And that's what the meeting planner wants.
Right.
They want a turnkey approach to sort of this social give back that conventions want. Well, that was fine prior to the pandemic. So now you get post-pandemic, local organizations like Dare to Care and Habitat for Humanity and Blessings in a Backpack, they don't have the staff now to make it turnkey. That client's got to do a little bit. You got to help us a little bit to get this done. And so while we may still have some groups that are willing to do that, one of the things that we've tried to do with Leave a Legacy is identify 11 different nonprofit organizations, all very different. And we go to the conventions that we have planned and we say, listen, we'd love for you to make a donation to one of these organizations that aligns with your mission. Whether you want to write a check, whether you want to put a box out at registration, whatever you want to do, we're trying to encourage them to leave a financial impact in our community. We want to have big check moments where, the organization and the local organization and the meeting convention that's here, they write the big check. So then we can begin to get back to the social impact. We want to eventually get to a point where when this community sees that there's meetings, conventions, and events, we we will do excuse me, through our offices this year, we'll do close to 700 meetings, conventions, and events. If we could get a fourth of those, an eighth of those, to say we want to write a check, and we can do a big check moment, the community begins to see the value, the social value of having these meetings, conventions, and events come into the marketplace. And so that's a somewhat quick thought on leave a legacy. But to your original question, yes, economic impact is still important, but social impact has become as important as well. How are you, it's almost like your communities are saying, tourism, we appreciate you, but we're asking everyone to help make the community better. And what are you doing to make the community better?
Okay. You said you host about 700 meetings, conventions, and events. Is that number where it was in 2019 pre-pandemic?
No, 2019, we hosted 881.
Okay.
I know that number very well because I've been asked about it about 100 times. And so we've got a little ways to go to get back to where we were, but we're getting there. We're certainly getting there.
And I know you lead Louisville Tourism's new Black Tourism Advisory Council, which works to draw more diverse visitors to the city. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, so BTAC, and Black Tourism Advisory Council, we call it BTAC. Yeah, we put this together, and it was in the summer of 2020. And there's three basic pillars for this group. One, marketing. We want to make sure that whether it's our website or our publications, that they are representative of our community. So we want to keep our BTAC engaged in that space. Two, product development. How do we, and let me start with this. When we got the BTAC together, we said, listen, we have a goal. We want to grow our African-American leisure visitation from the current 11% of what it was in 2019 to 14%. And we want your help to help us do that. So we identified a goal for this group because I believe in goals. I think goals keep people focused. So we got the goal. And so 3 areas for them: marketing, product development. Let me give you an example of product development. So in this community, it was widely known that 14 of the first 28 Kentucky Derby races were won by African-American jockeys. But that story wasn't being told. And so we now tell that story. We worked with our BTAC to tell that story. Thomas Bullock, first African-American to write a cocktail book in 1919. People in this community knew about Thomas Bullock, but we weren't telling his story. And so now we tell that story. And we see all of that as adding, if you want to attract, and I don't think it's not necessary to have specific content for a culture of individuals you want to attract to your community, but it does make the visit more rich, more full, when there's some culturally identifiable things that an individual would identify with. And so that was the point of the product development. The third item we asked BTAC to do was business to business. How do we ensure that the economic impact of meetings, conventions, and events and leisure visitors can be that all people that have a opportunity? We wanted to ensure that all businesses that have a relatable business have an opportunity to participate in the economic impact of tourism. And what we know is You take those 881 meetings, conventions, and events that happen here, and if you just pull out the 150 very large events, and I'm just throwing numbers out. When those events come to town, those citywides, they're going to hire 7 or 8 local organizations to help them make sure their event is successful, whether it's AV, who knows, a host of different things. And what we knew is that the majority of the time, it was the same businesses that were getting asked to do that. How do you open that up to make sure that there are culturally diverse businesses that have an opportunity to participate in the economic impact of tourism? And so we asked our BTAC to help us identify more businesses, whether it was restaurants, transportation companies, bakers, AV, et cetera, that we could get into our system to make sure when the opportunity came up, these folks would have just as much of an opportunity to bid on a piece of business as anyone else. And so they've done a good job of helping us to have a better business-to-business relationship with a lot of different businesses that we didn't have prior to the BTAC. So marketing, product development, and business-to-business is what we asked the BTAC to do.
Are you ready to celebrate your successes in the world of meetings and events? The Skift Meetings Awards are back for 2024, recognizing the most innovative business events companies across 15 categories, and we want you to be a part of it. Winners will feature on Skift Meetings, sending a clear signal to events professionals around the world that these are partners they can rely on. The final deadline for submissions is June 11th. We encourage you to start your submission today to secure the best entry rates. For more information and to start your submission, head to live.skift.com.
In 2020, after George Floyd's murder, you were part of an open letter that was written reflecting on systemic racism in the industry. Can you explain why you felt it was important to write that letter? And do you think things have improved in the industry?
Well, I think it was important to write the letter because there's just not a whole lot of folks in leadership that look like me. And I don't think that anyone in the industry denied that that was a fact. Mm-hmm. And when I say the industry, I'm speaking from the DMO CVB side of things. I know our industry is much bigger than that, but that's what I'm referring to. And so, yeah, I mean, that's a fact. It's evident, and quite honestly, I think it still is. I mentioned to you I was at the DI CEO Summit. Not a lot of folks in that room that look like me. And so we've got a long ways to go to just, have a good percentage of our leadership be culturally diverse in this industry. And so, I think the industry, let me say this, prior to the pandemic and prior to 2020, Andrea, I can't tell you the number of DEI multicultural initiatives that I have sat on through the course of my career in this industry. And great conversations, people that really care. But to my point earlier, there were very rarely any goals that were set. And when there's no goal set, there's usually not much that gets done. Mm-hmm. I think the difference today is that there seems to be much more intentionality by many of my peers and their cities and their destinations. Just like I talked to you about what we're doing with BTAC here in Louisville, there's more intentionality to trying to fill that gap that we have in the industry. And I think, now this is just me talking, I can't speak for everyone, but I've always said, I think we try to just have a diversity program and we go try to grab someone from outside of the industry and bring them in and try to fill that box in and say we've got diversity. And I think what I'd like to see more of is let's start with creating partnerships with universities. And if we're just talking about African Americans for the point of this conversation, you can create relationships with historically Black colleges that have a hospitality program. Build relationships there where you have partnerships. Then build an internship in your organizations for those individuals at the schools. When you get those folks out of school and they get into your organization, make sure you build out career pathways so that they've got a pathway to getting to leadership, because it may take 10 years. Right. But if you communicate and you have good career pathways for folks, people buy in. And then we got to have mentorship. You got to have folks who keep an eye out and say, I want to see this person through. I want to be their mentor. I want to help them to be successful. But we need more of a grassroots kind of program where we think long term. And so if you say today, listen, we're going to create a university partnership, and what I hope is that in 5 years or 6 years, we've added, if we're talking about my organization, you could say we've added 6 or 7 culturally diverse individuals to our organization through this partnership, mentorship, internship with these individuals. But I just think we need more of a grassroots effort. And we have to think about it long term and not think about, I want to create a DEI program today and I want to go out and hire a couple of folks that fit that criteria and then we'll be good. Mm-hmm. That's not going to be sustainable long term. You need a long-term program. We need to think about our industry and think about young folks we want to bring into our industry that'll be in the industry 15, 20 years from now, so that 15, 20 years from now, when I'm long retired and someone goes to the DEI CEO Summit, it's a much more diverse group of people in that room because we invested in bringing young folks along and into our industry. And so that's my soapbox moment about.
So you just talked about the importance of mentorship. Have you had any mentors that helped you get to where you are today?
Yeah, I saw your question. That's always an interesting question. I had to think about it. I grew up in a military family. So my brother, my sister, my father, who are all passed away, by the way, they were all Army, and I was the black sheep in the family, and I went to college. And, the interesting thing about growing up in a military family is understanding serving others for a greater good. And I learned that. I learned about respecting our flag and respecting our country from my father, brother, and sister. And so serving others probably is always with me in terms of what I've learned from them. Industry-wise, listen, Jack Berry in Richmond, Virginia. Andrea, I am not where I am today without Jack Berry, who's the president and CEO of Richmond Region Tourism. He was a great leader, continues to be a good mentor for me. Appreciate him every day. Anytime someone asks me a question, I go back and talk about Jack Berry and my time in my 17 years in Richmond working directly with Jack. And then, of course, I've got Al Hutchinson, who's president of Baltimore, Melvin Tennant, who's president of Minneapolis, and Elliot Ferguson, who's president of Washington, D.C., are very close friends of mine who I communicate with on a regular basis as we go through everything we go through in these jobs. And so that's probably my answer to that question as far as mentorship.
Okay. We touched upon how DMOs must help businesses in their community. Can you talk a bit about how you manage political decisions? I mean, it's been a hot button topic, especially with Roe versus Wade.
Yeah, I was interviewing yesterday, and some young students asked me, with some of the LGBTQ legislation that the legislators tried to get pushed through this past session, how do you market the city? And I said to them, I market Louisville. And I talk about what we do in Louisville as it relates to human rights, and being a welcoming destination. I cannot focus in on the state of Kentucky and the legislators. And while I know that impacts Louisville, I know that Louisville does a lot in that space. And so that's my focus. I will continue to go to the Capitol and lobby and tell folks why certain legislation is damaging to bring in visitors to our state and to our city. But when it's all said and done, depending upon how that legislation goes, I go back and I begin to market our city and what we do in this city specifically, whether it's being a welcoming environment for all, which includes the LGBTQ community, or for African Americans, or for Hispanic Americans. I try to tell our story, and I try to let Louisville stand on its own merits, for people to decide whether it's a place they want to visit and will feel comfortable visiting.
And telling the authentic story of a destination like yours is important, isn't it?
Oh my gosh, yes. I don't, one of my favorite stories is about Richmond. Richmond's story is history, but that community did not want to tell that story. They just felt like it was damaging, and they eventually got to a point where that is the foundation. That's the authentic. What authenticates them is the history. You've got to find a way to tell that story in history in a way that visitors can interact with it. And so that's the challenge. But they eventually got to a point where they understood this is what's going to set us apart. This is what our brand's going to be. And similar here with Louisville. We tell the story, next year, the Kentucky Derby will be 150 years old.
Wow.
The 150th race. That is the history of this community, the bourbon industry, and how long the bourbon industry has been in place, and telling the story of the culture, the history, the character, the water, how we got there. Talking about Muhammad Ali and being from here and his humanitarian efforts, going back to the 60s. And of course, we've got the Louisville Slugger Museum and Bat Factory. And, up until about, I guess, 10, 15 years ago, Louisville Slugger made all the bats for Major League Baseball, and they did for decades. And so there's a real history there. So those are the kind of things you tell the foundation of what makes you authentic. And then if you want to build some other type of programming on top of that, then that's work. But I think you always have to have the foundation of what makes you authentic, what makes the city what it is, before you can do anything else.
You've mentioned a few times in our conversation the importance of setting goals. Are there any other attributes and qualities that you've developed that have helped you become successful?
Well, I tell you, I don't know that I realized this about myself, but I've been told, and during the pandemic, by some of my staff and others, just my ability to learn and allow new facts to change my opinion. I've always been a lifelong learner. Many times I sit on boards and committees because I want to learn. I want to continue to evolve. And so I've continued to be that person where there's always new information to read and to understand. I think today I'm 59, and I think today, me taking my experience and telling a 25-year-old, well, you need to do what I did, and I did this, and this to get to where I was. I think that's a mistake today. You know, I don't think we can. I don't think that's the pathway for anyone anyway. It was like that for a long time. You know, everyone said, hey, you do this, and this is what I did, and you can be successful the same way. The world's changed. How we work in our offices has changed, what the expectations are. You know, things have changed. And so we all have had to evolve and adapt. And so, yeah, as a leader, I try to be much more open-minded and try to help people to get to where they want to get to, and not necessarily the same way I got here. I don't think everything gets thrown out of the window in terms of my journey, but it's not just the black and white of how I got here, for how someone can be successful.
What is the one thing people would be surprised to learn about you?
Well, I am much more of an introvert than I think people realize. You know, yeah, I guess I'm a social introvert, if there's such a thing. But now I love just, you know, when the day is over, when the week is over, you know, I'm real good in my own space, in my own head, and spending time on my deck with a little bit of classic jazz and a cigar and a bourbon, and you know, I could sit there for a couple hours on my own. So I just think I'm probably more of I think people don't think I'm an introvert. They think I'm an extrovert.
Okay.
But I'm much more of an introvert than people think.
And what do you feel the future holds for the industry?
No, Andrea, I think it's a little bit of what we talked about earlier. I think the intentionality around sustainability. And when I talk about sustainability, I talk about the balance of environmental, social, and economic sustainability. If you take a look at the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals, there's so much there in the social space, the economic space. And I think we're going to see our industry be much more intentional in those spaces in the future. We talked about our Leave a Legacy program, what I'm doing with Black Tourism Advisory Council. You know, how do we make the world more equitable? You know, I do think that our industry, as you asked a great question. I do think our industry is going to have much more of a social impact moving forward in the future, not just talking about economic impact, but a social impact within our community. So I think that's going to be the real future, one of the futures for our industry.
We always end our podcast by asking, who should we have on one of our upcoming episodes?
Yeah, and I've thought about that, and you know, I think you should talk to one of the 40 under 40 leaders, someone who has had a really good career and fast tracked, and they're maybe in their mid to late 30s, but they're in leadership, you know, because I think they're not too far gone like I am. You know, they know technology and think about technology, and they look at the world a little differently. But I do think we've got to, and I've tried to do it more in my own office, we've got to bring more younger voices to the decision making of our industry within our own organizations. So I would suggest you find a 40 under 40 person, and have a conversation with them about, you know, asking them a lot of the questions you just asked me, because I'd be interested to hear that myself.
That sounds great. Well, this was wonderful. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Andrea. I appreciate all the questions. And
yeah, great conversation. Good. And I'll make sure you get the information about the Skift meetings for him.
That'd be great. Yeah, I've never heard of that, so I'd be interested.
Okay.
I have a lot high level respect for what you all do at Skift.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Thanks, Andrea.
Thanks. See ya. Bye.
Okay, bye.